Hello and welcome. This is Omar for Awesome SVGs. And first of all, I wanted to say that this is going to be a very long video. It has 4 sections. The first one is about labeling your ink pads. The second is about assembling your chipboard or paperboard inserts. The third one is about sewing the bag. And the fourth one is about padding and finishing the bag. You will find in the description below the timing for each of the chapters, so you can skip ahead if you want to. Last year, when I finally got all my distress ink pads, I made a storage box. It has individual inserts and all my ink pads are labeled. I also like to keep this color chart to know what the colors are, and I laminated it so I can also use it as a palette. All my ink pads are labeled with my DYMO labeler, and I also keep my blending foams underneath my ink pads. I wanted to step it up this year when the Distress Oxide inks came out, so I decided to make a new storage bag. So I picked a more fashionable fabric and a contrasting zipper. I added handles to it also. And this is the best part. I painted all the inserts gold to match the polka dot design on the denim and also the lining. All my ink pads are labeled. The inserts are also individual, and you can take them out and you can take them with you with just specific ink pads. It's also very easy to put them back in. And when you close the bag, all your ink pads are stored on the right side up. You can also keep them on shelves, visible, and they look very good, and it's easy to take them out. So let's start. For labeling your ink pads, I like to use a DYMO label. For Distress Oxide inks, I used a white on transparent label. I think it shows very good and it also looks very neat. I like putting a label on one side and also on the opposite side. This way I don't have to worry too much on which side I store my labels on, and I can always have the name a quarter of a turn away in case I don't put it on the right side. The way I do this is I create my labels on my DYMO, peel the backing, take your ink pad. Make sure not to put your label on top of this extruded piece of plastic. Align your label to the bottom edge of the border and press it. Now here, a piece of plastic or something got stuck underneath the label. So what I did was peel off the label and take my craft knife and remove that little piece of debris. You can do this with these labels. They have adhesive that is strong enough to do this. Now with your craft knife, remove any excess of the tape, because these labels are a little bit wider than the edge of your ink pad, and do the same for the other edge of the label. It's very important that you do this, because if you don't, your label can come off. Now place another label on the opposite side of your ink pad, aligning the border to the bottom edge. Press it, very good. Trim any excess with a craft knife, and you're good to go. Now I also like to keep my blending foams attached to my ink pads. So what I do is take a piece of Velcro. You want the rough side of the Velcro, which is called the hook, and glue it under your ink pad using a rubber cement or any strong adhesive like that. Make sure to put a generous amount of adhesive and spread it right up to the edges so it's not easy for them to come off. Let it dry for a while and glue it to the bottom of your ink pad. Press it very good and wait for a couple of hours to dry. Once it's dried, you can put your blending foams underneath your ink pads. I like to keep them that way, and also the storage holds the ink pads better if you have the foam attached to them. The file you can download at my blog has everything you need to make the fabric bag. Here's the pattern for that. And also the chipboard inserts. Please notice that the measurements are in millimeters, since it's easier for me to give you that measurement system. But I also provided SVG files so you can cut pieces of chipboard, put them on your cutting mats, and draw them with your Cricut Explorer, which is what I did, using a 0.5 precision pen from American Crafts. Here are all the pieces I drew with my Cricut Explorer. The Cricut Explorer is not able to cut the chipboard. This is 1.5 millimeter thick chipboard. But what you can do is draw them with a pen. I tried cutting a couple, but it didn't work too well, so I just drew them with my machine and decided to cut them by hand. Here are the side pieces, the back, the top, and the bottom pieces for each unit. I cut 8 of them. And you can cut them on 12 by 12 pieces of chipboard. I also cut a lot of shelves for this. The final design does not have the notch on the shelves, so you don't have to cut them. The notch is just on the bottom piece. Being a 1.5 millimeter thick chipboard, I had to do a 3-pass cut with a craft knife, and I use one of those snap-off blades craft knives. I like that you can snap off a piece of the blade and you always have a sharp point on your blade each time. This helps a lot when cutting this thick material. Once you've cut all your pieces, start assembling your storage units. You will need your side pieces, your shelf supports, glue, and a scrap piece of chipboard. I like to use Aleene's tacky glue. This is the quick dry version. It's a very good glue that dries very fast, and it allows you to make some adjustments of your pieces. I started with the front edge of my side piece, distributed the glue with a scrap piece of chipboard, and started gluing my shelf supports. You can use a scrap piece of chipboard also to make sure the separation between the shelf supports is correct, and also for better alignment. Make sure you align your shelf supports with the lines you drew in between the shelf supports, and also with the vertical line that marks the frontmost position of your shelf support. Apply glue to the next 4 shelf supports. Distribute the glue with a scrap piece of chipboard, and glue the rest of your shelf supports. The lines drawn with your Cricut Explorer or by hand are very helpful for this. This will determine the separation between each shelf. It will give you the right spacing for your ink pads. Here you can see the last shelf support does not touch the top or the bottom edge of your side piece. Press each shelf support again and remove any excess glue from the sides using a scrap piece of chipboard. Now that the first row is done, you can start with the back row of shelf supports. Apply some glue. I just used what I had left on my scrap piece of chipboard, and glue your shelf supports. Here you can see I'm aligning the shelf support 1.5 millimeters from the back edge of the side piece. And then I just applied glue to the rest of the shelf supports and glued them using a scrap piece of chipboard as a guide for correct spacing. Notice I'm gluing every shelf support 1.5 millimeters from the back edge of the side piece. You can do some adjustments. This is the good thing about this glue, that it lets you move slightly if you didn't glue any pieces correctly. Finish gluing the last shelf supports. Sorry about my head getting in the way. I just had to see correctly. And you're finished with one of the side pieces. Give it a good press, and now check for any piece that might stick out of the line. Here you can see I'm just trimming a little bit of chipboard that went too far to the back. Now do the rest of your side pieces. Glue the shelf supports. Remember to align them to the lines that you drew with your machine. Once I got a hang of it, I just did them in larger groups of shelf supports because it didn't take me as long as it took me with the first one. Just like you did the first time, make any adjustments, trim any excess of chipboard that might have gone out of the lines, and do the next row. I really wish I could work this fast. Now that you have all your shelf supports glued to your side pieces, take your shelves and try them on the slits that you just created. They should fit very snug there. If any of your shelves don't fit, take your craft knife and trim pieces of your shelf support for them to get there easier. Remove the excess, try your shelf again, and keep trying the rest of the shelves. Now try them on the opposite side also, and make sure they fit the slits correctly. Try the top and the bottom piece, and if they fit, the back piece should fit also. This is a good fit. Start gluing your shelves. Put some glue on the slits. It doesn't have to be perfect. The good thing about chipboard is that it's a very porous material, so the glue will get there eventually. Now press the shelf on the slit, and make sure the glue oozes out of the slit. This will tell you that your shelf is positioned correctly. Keep pressing the rest of your shelves. Here you can see me aligning the shelves to the back piece of the shelf support. Make sure your shelves do not go all the way to the back edge of your side piece. Put some glue on the opposite side and start putting your shelves and slide the slits of the opposite side. Do this very carefully. Do not press too hard, and make sure the shelves go inside all of the slits before you press. Sometimes it's tricky to do, but it's not impossible. Besides, the glue lets you rearrange things here and there. Once you're sure all your shelves are in, give it a good press. Do not press too hard because your shelves could break. Remove any excess glue from the sides. And make sure the shelves align with the shelf supports 1.5 millimeters from the back edge of your side piece. Now start preparing your top and your bottom pieces. Cut the notch from your bottom piece using a craft knife. Doing it by hand will leave a rough edge that you can smooth out using sandpaper. Now to glue your top and bottom pieces, add glue to the rim of your side piece. Make sure you spread the glue using a scrap piece of chipboard. Center your top piece and press. Remove any excess glue that might ooze out of your top piece and hold it there for a couple of seconds. Now for the bottom piece, also add glue to the rim of the side piece. Center your bottom piece after distributing the glue with the use of a scrap piece of chipboard. Make sure to put the notch that you made on the bottom piece towards the front of the unit. This is the side where the shelves are further from the edge of your side piece. And press. Remember to remove any excess glue that might ooze out of your bottom piece. And now you're ready to glue the back piece. Do the same that you did with the top and the bottom piece. Add glue to the rim of the side piece, the bottom piece, and the top piece. Also put some glue on the back edge of your shelves. Center your back piece, and if everything went correctly, it should fit. Press against the back border of the shelves. And in case you press too hard, you can use a scrap piece of chipboard just to push from the inside of the unit and realign it. Press and remove any excess glue that oozes out of your edge. And there you go. Your first unit is ready. Now you only have to repeat this 7 times. I know it's hard to do, but as you can see, your ink pads fit very nicely on the unit. Repeat this with your other pieces. This is my second unit. And keep going until you have all 8 units ready. If you're not planning on making the fabric bag, you can just do individual units to keep your ink pads handy and organized. Your shelves on one side like you did before. Remember to test them on the slits before you start gluing them, and removing any excess from the shelf supports that might interfere with the correct sliding of the shelves. Add your top and bottom pieces and your back piece once those are glued in. Now for finishing touches, you can sand all the edges, all the rough edges, and that way you can also take away some of the glue that might still stick to the edges of your unit. And here you have 2 units ready to go. Here are some tips. In case you are not using a fast or quick drying glue, you can use rubber bands to hold your pieces together instead of pressing and holding them for too long. If your back piece doesn't fit correctly and you see any gaps between your side, your top, bottom pieces and your back piece, you can use some glue to fill those gaps. Just remember to put enough glue and use a scrap piece of chipboard to kind of just push it in. Then you can use your rubber bands to hold it in place. Use some rubber bands to hold it in place and keep pressing. And after a couple of minutes, you can take the rubber bands out. To finish them, I gave each unit 3 coats of metallic gold spray paint. You can also give them a final coat of clear varnish, but in this case I just left them like this to keep the distressed look on them. I chose gold to match my bag lining, and I think it looks pretty good, don't you? And here's how you make the bag. The pattern provided has measurements to cut your outer fabric and your lining fabric. Trace your lines according to the pattern, and also cut both lining pieces. If you are using a light or stretchy fabric, it's a good idea to use fusible interfacing or fusible stabilizer. This will give more body to the bag and will reinforce your fabric. In my case, I used a heavy denim, so I did not need to use any kind of stabilizers. Make sure your measurements are correct by placing your inserts and your fabric and making sure you have enough room for the padding and the sewing and the seam allowances. Also make sure the lining matches the outside fabric. The cutouts and the corners, all the sewing lines and the folding lines, and also the line in the center. I started sewing my lining pieces, and for that I placed both lining pieces right sides facing, and I sewed a permanent stitching from the markings out and a basting stitching in between the markings. This will allow for your zipper to be sewn in, and it is easy to take the basting out once it's inserted. Once you've done that, open your seam allowances and press them. Lay your zipper with the right side facing down, and make sure to mark where the basting stitching is. You will also need scraps piece of fabric. I used a matching color piece of fabric here to do the end tabs that you will place before attaching your zipper. This will cover the end of the zipper once it's sewn in. Pin it just to the seam allowance. Do not catch the lining there. Place the other tab that should be almost half an inch from the basting stitching mark. And sew your zipper tape. Once it's sewn in, open your seam allowance and sew the other half of the zipper tape. Sometimes it's easier to sew halfway and then open the zipper and sew the rest of the zipper tape. Now turn it around and remove the basting stitches. You can also do a top stitching on the right side of the zipper. This will keep the zipper hidden. I wanted that white contrast on the zipper, that's why I didn't top stitched it. And once your basting stitches are removed, open your zipper. And you can do a top stitching on the right side to keep it hidden. Trim the zipper tape and sew a very short zigzag stitch at the end of the zipper to prevent the zipper pull to come off. Once you've done that, your inner zipper is already installed. Now place your outer fabric on top of your lining fabric and make sure all the lines match. The center line and the cutting lines on the corners. And now you're ready to cut all excess from the corners and the center of your lining and outer fabric pieces. Now it's time to start assembling your lining piece. Align the corners, like so, pin them, and sew them 5/8 of an inch from the edge. Do the same with all 4 corners. Now once you've done that, it's time to sew the bottom corners. Align the edges, pin your corner, and this time sew from the corner halfway to the center line. Do not sew all the way in. Do the same for the opposite side. And remember to sew from the corner halfway to the center line on both sides. Pin also the other side of the bag. And sew it the same way that you did it before. And here you have the main idea for the lining. Bring in your inserts and make sure you have enough room for the seam allowances and the padding later. Now also trim the excess fabric on your outer fabric, the corners and the center pieces. And sew it the same way that you did your lining. And now align the corners, pin them, and sew them like you did your lining. When you get to the bottom corners, remember to do a marking to sew halfway from the corner to the center line. Prepare your handles. For that, cut both pieces and also cut a piece of fusible interfacing. This is a heavyweight interfacing or stabilizer. Fold it in half. Fold your outer fabric in half, match the centers, and press them. Now fold the edges of the fabric to the center line and then fold them in half again. This will give you a handle with 4 layers of fabric and 2 layers of interfacing. It will give you very heavy handles, and it is very difficult to sew them if you fold it and try to sew all 8 layers. So trim 3 of the layers, just leave the outer layer, fold it in, and I used a piece of fusible web to keep it in place. Do the same on the other side. I cut 1 inch from the end of the handle and I cut all 3 inner layers. I just left the outmost fabric layer. Cut any excess and trim the corners. Put a piece of fusible web and press it with your iron. Do the same on the other handle. And here you have both handles with a fusible web and the folded piece. This will give you nice finishes. Now top stitch your handles to keep them together, to keep all the layers together, and you're ready to sew them on your outer fabric. Pin them in place. Now make sure not to catch any fabric like I did here. So I took the fabric away, then pinned my handle and used a sewing clip to keep the rest of the fabric away from where I wanted to sew. I drew a line 1/2 inch from the border or the end of the handle and drew a horizontal line to mark where I wanted to top stitch my handle. Do the same with the other end of your handle and stitch a square around the end of the handle and also an X. I finished my handles by ironing pieces of fusible interfacing on the back of the stitching to keep them in place. Now, cut open the seam allowances on your corners and press them open with your iron. I also used a piece of fusible web to keep them flat and prevent them from bunching up once my bag was assembled. Do the same with your lining. And now you're ready to attach your lining to the outer fabric and attaching the zipper, the outer zipper. Match the corners of your lining and your outer fabric with right sides facing. start with one side. I like to burn the ends of my zipper tape so they don't fray. Mark the center of your zipper. And also mark the other side of the zipper tape. Now measure from the center of your fabric and lining to the corners and mark your zipper. Remember to do a marking on both sides of the zipper tape. Also mark the bottom corner on both sides of the zipper tape. The marking that you do on the bottom corner is with the seam allowances folded in. Now with the right side of your zipper facing your outer fabric, the right side of your outer fabric, start pinning your zipper. Match the center line and the corner markings. I like to use a zigzag stitch at the end of the zipper tape so my zipper pulls don't come off. Now match the corners on the lining and the outer fabric and do the same thing with the bottom corners of the bag. Pin your zipper in place, distribute the rest of the fabric along. And remember that the bottom side of the bag should have the seam allowances folded in, like so. And now you will attach your zipper with a zipper foot on your machine close to your zipper coil. I like to do a basting stitch by hand before taking it to my machine. It's easier for me, but if you can't do it with your machine right away, just do what's best for you. Make sure you open the inner zipper just in case you need to turn things around. And once you've machine stitched your zipper, take the basting stitches away. Once you've removed all your basting stitches, turn your fabric around, pull on your fabric, on your outer fabric and your lining fabric, and top stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric. This will keep your outer fabric and your lining fabric away from your zipper coil. Do that from one end to another. Now you're pretty much done with one side of the fabric. Now attach the other side of your zipper tape to the other side of your fabric and lining. For this, take your zipper tape with the right side of the zipper facing the right side of the outer fabric. Take your lining fabric, turn it around, and pin the corners, center lines, and the bottom edge of the bag. Now I also did a basting stitching to keep the zipper in place before taking it to my machine. And then I machine stitched all the way around. Remove the basting stitches. And turn your fabric. This can be a little bit tricky. So first, take your inner zipper and pull everything out from your inner zipper. And now open the outside zipper. And pull everything through the main opening. And there you go. Pull your outer fabric and lining fabric and top stitch 1/8 of an inch very close to the zipper coil. Now you have to close the bag. And for this, take the center piece of your fabric, the one that has the inner zipper attached, and the center of the outer fabric. Match the center of both. And stitch from one corner to the other, leaving your zipper out. This will leave your zipper loose. And now you just have to finish it by sewing it with a ladder stitch that I'll show you right now. I like to do this by hand. It's easier for me to do it by hand, and this way you don't catch the zipper coil and the zipper is free to move from one end to the other. So do a ladder stitch, catching the fabric on one side and then the zipper tape on the other side. Finally, tie the ends of your ladder stitch. And repeat the same process on the other 4 pieces of the zipper tape. Here you can see me doing it on the other side. I pushed the knot of the thread in and started ladder stitching the outer fabric. Remember not to stitch the zipper coil. Keep away from the zipper coil because if you stitch there, your zipper pull will not be able to move through the zipper coil. Tie a knot at the end of your thread, and you have the outer fabric on one side ready. Now it's time to do a ladder stitch on the lining fabric as well. And here's how you do it. And to finish this side of the bag, also do a ladder stitch on the lining fabric on the other side of the zipper coil. Once you're done with that side, repeat the same process on the opposite side, and your bag is pretty much done. Now it's time to do the padding and the final touches on your bag. Make sure your zipper slides smoothly from one side to the other without getting caught in the lining or the outer fabric. Reinforcing and padding your bag is very important since you're using separate inserts for your ink pads. I like to use also the paperboard or the chipboard and scrap pieces of fabric to join them together. I used 2 inches strips of fabric and I drew a line 1 inch from the edge of each piece of reinforcement. This is to attach the strips of fabric, so for that, add some glue. I used the same glue that I used to assemble the inserts. Distribute the glue using a scrap piece of chipboard and attach your strip of fabric. Do the same for all 3 edges. And you can smooth out the surface using also the scrap piece of chipboard or paperboard. Now you're ready to glue your side and top pieces. For this, also draw a 1-inch line from the edge, apply some glue, spread the glue using a scrap piece of chipboard. Make sure you get the glue right into the corners of the chipboard and attach it, lifting the strip of fabric and holding the side piece at a 90-degree angle. This will allow for a 1.5mm separation between the pieces, and you will be able to fold it later when you get the pieces into the bag. Do the same for the other side piece and the top piece. Before gluing the top piece, make sure you trim all the excess fabric. And to finish attaching the fabric strips, turn it and press all the fabric against the chipboard. Attach the padding using also glue. I used a good amount of glue. And attach your padding material. Make sure the padding does not touch the edges of your piece. I cut it a 1/2 inch smaller than the reinforcement pieces. Now do the same on the sides and the top. The bottom reinforcement piece is a separate piece. I did this because it's easier to put the piece inside the bag once it's assembled. Now also apply a generous amount of glue and attach your padding. And repeat the same with the opposite reinforcement piece. Once you have all reinforcement pieces done, bend them and flatten them to get them into the bag. And here's how you do it. Open the inner zipper of your bag, flatten your reinforcement insert, get it into the bag, align the corners of the bag with the corners of the reinforcement piece. Make sure the padding goes to the outside of the bag. And also make sure the seam allowances lay on the inside of the insert. Arrange your fabric around all the edges. And use some sewing clips to hold it while you put the insert on the opposite side. Now take your opposite side insert, flatten it, get it into the bag, matching all the corners of the fabric and the corners of the reinforcement insert. Make sure the padding goes to the outside of the bag. Arrange your fabric around. You can use sewing clips to avoid the already arranged fabric from moving. And finally, put in the bottom piece. Please notice that this piece has the padding towards the inside of the bag. Arrange the fabric around the piece and do the same for the opposite side. You can close your zipper now, and your bag's ready. Make sure your inserts fit correctly inside the bag. For me, I felt they were a little bit loose inside, so I ended up using a little bit of padding on the inside of the sides of the inserts also. And for finishing touches, I sewed a square of fabric at the end of each zipper. And this is how I did it. I marked where I wanted my squares of fabric. They were 1-inch squares of fabric, and they were sewed 1/2 inch from the end of the bag. So cut a piece of fabric, measure your zipper tape, sew your square of fabric, cut any excess, turn it around, make sure the corners are turned correctly using your scissors or some tool to turn the corners. Now fold the edges, the raw edges of the fabric. Make sure both zipper ends match in size. And push the end of your zipper tape inside the piece you just made. You finally sew all the way around so it doesn't move. This will also prevent the zipper pull from going outside the zipper tape. And here's the finished bag. Here you can see the inserts already painted with the ink pads in. I like to arrange my ink pads alphabetically. This way it's easier for me to find them. And to position them, make sure the notch goes to the bottom of the bag and place the inserts on the sides, and finally the inserts on the center, pushing a little bit. Here you can see the padding I used on the sides, and this allows for the inserts to fit snugged into the bag, so they won't move when you take the ink pads out. And I think they're more protected this way. Here's the finished bag. Here you can see the inserts. And the spaces you see between the ink pads are for the colors that are not out yet. This is the top of the bag, and here you can see when you close the bag, all your ink pads are stored right side up. And here's the closed bag. So there you have a fun project to store your ink pads. I hope this was inspiring to you. Some of the products I used are linked in the YouTube description below, as always. And I really thank you for sticking with me until the very end of this really long video. Now here are a couple more videos you could be interested in. I hope you come back soon, and you have a great week. Bye bye.